This is 7 News Late Edition with Naomi Robson.
A more dangerous new role for our warships inside the Gulf, but some cautious optimism on the immediate fate of our hostages in Baghdad. Good evening. And the Gulf crisis heads our bulletin. The worrying news: our warships are to be moved to potential hotspots in the Persian Gulf to protect American aircraft carriers. Federal Cabinet tonight decided on the upgraded role for the warships Brisbane and Sydney. Dennis Grant reports we'll also send 2 medical teams to join British and American ground forces.
Tonight, the Prime Minister had a lesser conflict on his mind. He was playing host to the England cricket team at the Lodge. Tomorrow, they'll pad up against a Prime Minister's 11 in Canberra. Their main worry, the weather. Earlier, Mr Hawke presided over a meeting of the Federal Cabinet, which decided to extend the Navy's orders, now allowing the destroyer Brisbane and frigate Sydney to escort American vessels in the Persian Gulf. Previously, Australian vessels had operated outside the mouth of the Gulf. Mr Hawke won over the factions, a split in the left wing diluting opposition to the escalation. Even the centre-left holding deep concerns.
One is Australia, the possibility of an escalation and Australia's involvement in that escalation. And the second is the need to keep negotiations open and to make negotiation the first option, the military option, down the track, not the other way round.
But in Baghdad tonight, cautious optimism that the Australian hostages may be close to release. Private envoy and former Cabinet Minister Tom Uren won't be drawn on speculation that an announcement from Iraqi authorities is imminent.
The matter's very delicate, and we're standing by. Now, that's all I can say.
But the speculation was lent credibility by the Iraqi ambassador in Canberra. He acknowledged the envoys had put pressure on the Baghdad government, which was likely to draw a response.
It is useful to release the Australians because there are, great support from the people of Australia and that support the position of Iraq. So if you release the hostages, I think it is useful for both sides.
In Canberra, Dennis Grant, 7 News.
The leader of an Australian Arab delegation to Iraq, Eddie Obeid, said from Baghdad a few minutes ago that, in his words, all the vibes were right for good news on our hostages in a matter of days rather than weeks. Mr Obeid, publisher of the Arabic newspaper El Telegraph, says he has high hopes that all 29 Australians will be released, but he stressed the situation in Baghdad changes constantly. Whatever Canberra decides, our forces could well find themselves caught up in fighting. The United States and Iraq have agreed to talk, but neither side is showing any sign of compromise. Tony Barnett reports.
The Americans left no doubt today that the threat of war still stands. Secretary of State James Baker says he'll carry just one message to Baghdad, and that's for Iraq to get out of Kuwait. There'll be no reward for Hussein if he complies, and there is no room for compromise.
Let me say one more time, we are not going to negotiate short of the United Nations resolutions. We shouldn't do that. We are not going to do that.
But compromise is what Saddam Hussein wants. He says the crisis will move closer to war if the talks are merely a stunt to convince the US Congress and world opinion that all diplomatic efforts were being made. With real dialogue, and that means discussion on the Palestinian question, the Iraqi leader believes peace is an even money bet.
50-50.
The focus on peace talks hasn't eased the tension for Western forces in the Gulf. Once again, they were on yellow alert as Iraq tested missiles capable of carrying chemical weapons. For the hostages, some good news today. Muhammad Ali secured the release of 15 Americans, and wives of British hostages left for Baghdad in the hope of winning freedom for their husbands. But for most, it was a time to pray that a peaceful resolution can be reached before the January 15 deadline for Iraq to withdraw from Kuwait. In the United States, Tony Barnett, 7 News.
Australian wheat growers did their own dumping today. Tons of their product outside European and US consulates in Perth. They blame subsidised wheat from these countries for their worst season in more than 50 years. Laurie Wilson reports their action at least persuaded the federal government to hold crisis talks.
Australian farmers are hurting. First wool, now wheat, with local wheat growers caught in the crossfire of a trade war between the Europeans and the Americans.
Australian farmers and Australian communities are suffering from the dumping.
Today, farmers' frustrations boiled over in Perth as they dumped wheat on the doorsteps of the local European and US legations. 12 months ago, Australian farmers were getting $200 a tonne for their wheat. Today, it's just a little over half that, as they face their worst season in 50 years. The major cause, massive subsidies by the Europeans for their own farming communities. Subsidies which in turn are proving a major stumbling block at the present round of international trade talks in Brussels.
The impasse there is poisoning other parts of the round. Negotiations in other areas are going to be difficult.
Primary Industries Minister John Kerrin will hold crisis talks with the wheat farmers next week. In the meantime, Mr Kerrin, who's just returned from overseas, says he is cautiously optimistic about the outlook for Australian wool, with the prospect of increased wool sales over the next 6 to 12 months. But that's not likely to do much for Australia's balance of payments in the immediate future, nor will it have any impact on unemployment, set to jump dramatically over the next few months. Westpac is predicting the unemployment rate will reach 8.5%. Others say it could go higher.
Well, business people have been telling me that they'll be putting people off before Christmas, but they expect even more people to be put off after Christmas.
In Canberra, Laurie Wilson, 7 News.
Christmas comes but once a year, but paying for it can last forever. That's the warning from Canberra tonight. Lee Hatcher reports that our credit binge has already topped $20 billion.
Australians are the world's worst for consumer debt. It averages out at $2,000 per adult, and it's got nothing to do with housing loans. It's all personal loans and soaring credit card bills. Some people are still paying for Christmas 1988.
This is a vulnerable time for those with young families, and I believe they should keep in mind having to pay off their debts in February and March.
Good morning, Credit Line.
This financial counselling service is booked out until after Christmas. The credit crush is this bad.
A lot of our clients have been referred from the bankruptcy court, right, because they've seen that as their only resort to clear all their problems is to go bankrupt.
This is by far the biggest credit trap. The temptation of a nice new car. Credit Line had an 18-year-old called Tim come for help. He'd bought a car for $2,000. By the time he'd paid off the loan, he'd forked out more than $6,000.
Maybe we're not completely down the drain yet, but we've really got to start, I think, looking at what we can afford as against what we want.
The advice from the counselling services and the state government is summed up in this new advertising campaign.
Credit costs you, so think twice or pay the price.
Lee Hatcher, 7 News.
The other Christmas warning tonight, that cute Christmas toy could be a killer. Across Australia at this time of the year, inspectors are on the lookout for dangerous toys. They say parents should be too. In Sydney, a number have already been banned. More from Jim Marr.
Investigators surveyed 357 shops in 23 Sydney suburbs and 32 towns. They turned up a selection of colourful toys, attractive to young children, but potentially lethal. Almost all are foreign-made, flotation devices which don't carry warnings of the need for supervision, toys whose many parts are easily swallowed, and those which burst into flames.
Well, I think the most dangerous toy, in one sense, for actual physical damage to eyes and so forth, is this weapon.
The plastic gun fires nails, screws and other missiles. An interim ban has been put on its sale. A ban has also been imposed on this bicycle, Soviet-made and lacking the required back pedal brake. Fines for retailers range from $20,000 to $100,000. The Minister says most importers and retailers cooperate, but he warns against parents, short of money in the recession, choosing cheap but often unsafe imported toys. Jim Marr, 7 News.
Failed entrepreneur Christopher Skase got into the Christmas spirit today, handing out bargains to recession-ridden antique collectors. The occasion, a sale in Melbourne of artefacts from the failed Quintex empire. Bronwyn Carley was there.
The auction rooms were packed with buyers and spectators, but the real interest was not so much in the pieces as the incredible prices Christopher Skase paid for them.
The 19th century carved gilt columns with implied gesso, grape and weave decoration, lot 119, $5,000 each, 5 each,
puny when compared with the amount Skase forked out, $71,000 then, reduced to $14,000 today. And there was more. This Roman marble torso was worth $95,000 Skase dollars. Today it fetched only $16,000. A Roman fountain spout that Quintex paid more than $8,000 for went for less than $2,000. And an entire 18th century Spanish fountain, for Quintex a snip at $96,000, was today a chop with a price drop of nearly $30,000. Skase bought the Quintex collection through an exclusive Melbourne dealer for more than $2 million. Today it realised less than a quarter of that amount. Auctioneers say even in the entrepreneurial 80s, the prices he paid for average antiques were ludicrous. Bronwyn Kiley, 7 News.
7 News Late Edition continues after the break with Queensland's answer to the Mounties. 3 people in Sydney, including a young woman, have been charged over the abduction and rape of a teenage babysitter. Adam Walters reports.
22-year-old Rodney Raymond McCarthy and Diane Tania Ryan, 23, were arrested after police executed a search warrant on this house at Revesby last night. Police alleged the couple had been hiding in the ceiling of the home for almost an hour before surrendering. McCarthy was later charged with sexual assault and car stealing, while Ryan is accused of maliciously inflicting actual bodily harm. According to the police allegations, 19-year-old barman Rodney Phillip Haynes was an accessory to the crime. He allegedly helped McCarthy to dismantle the stolen panel van used to take the 17-year-old victim to local bushland as she was held at knife point. The court was told the attacks occurred last Tuesday after McCarthy and Ryan replied in person to a newspaper advertisement in which the victim advertised her services as a babysitter. The prosecutor told the court as the result of national media coverage, police were alerted to the stripping of the panel van in a backyard garage at the Revesby home, where detectives recovered a knife during last night's raid. Magistrate Max Kern granted Haynes and Ryan conditional bail before remanding McCarthy in custody to reappear in Bankstown Court on December 20th. Adam Walters, 7 News.
And in Melbourne today, 7 young men appeared in court charged with setting fire to scores of garden hedges. The group, all former schoolmates, face a total of 96 charges of arson over the fires, mostly in Melbourne's southeastern suburbs. Prosecutor Jeff Stewart said police spent thousands of man-hours investigating the fires, which did damage estimated at $320,000. Magistrate Roger Franich spent most of today hearing arguments on the admissibility of evidence from hedge owners. 2 Victorian fishermen drowned today in separate accidents, one from a boat in Port Phillip Bay, the other from rocks near the southern seaside town of Lorne. Ian Hislop reports.
A police launch recovered the 3-metre fishing boat after it was sighted circling out of control in calm waters about 6 kilometres off Point Cook. After a brief search, the body of the fisherman, aged in his 30s, was pulled from the water and returned to the nearby Air Force Base.
As you can see, the conditions here today, it's quite calm. It's at this stage, it's a battle until we get the results of an autopsy and a mechanical inspection of the boat.
It was the second drowning on Port Phillip Bay in just 4 days. In a near-identical incident last Friday, the body of a fisherman was recovered off Sandringham. And late today, the body of a 62-year-old man was pulled from the sea off Lorne. Police mounted a big air and sea search after reports that the North Sunshine Man was swept off the rocks while fishing shortly before midday. And in Melbourne, 2 teenagers were recovering from an ordeal which nearly saw them drown in a flooded storm water drain in Clayton yesterday. 16-year-old Kabil Velasquez and Elisa Gatowski were the subjects of a major search until they turned up to tell rescue personnel they survived after a 15-minute fight to stay afloat. Ian Hislop, 7 News.
The Civil Aviation Authority is investigating a potentially disastrous near miss between 2 aeroplanes only a few thousand metres over Sydney's northern suburbs. Kate Davies has the details of the incident.
Philippine Airlines flight PR209 was approaching Mascot around midday. At the same time, a Piper Cherokee flying from Bankstown to Brisbane strayed into the DC-10's airspace. Air traffic controllers spotted the planes at the same altitude, just 2 kilometres apart. The Piper was ordered to veer left as the airliner went on to make a normal landing. but a trouble-free takeoff in the United States. After 6 months of frustrating technical hitches, Space Shuttle Columbia finally got off the ground. During its 10-day stargazing mission, the crew will study high-energy radiation emissions from some of the hottest objects in the universe. In South Korea, students have been throwing hot objects at riot police when the National University tried to show banned North Korean films. Police smashed makeshift barriers. Students retaliated with firebombs. One officer was set alight. Police needed armoured vehicles to quell the protest. Kate Davies, 7 News.
No armoured vehicles required in the Brisbane suburb of Redcliffe. Police there have taken to bicycles in their desire to get closer to people. And in the Queensland town of Gympie, they're taking away parking meters. Brian Anderson begins this report in Redcliffe, where the new mounted police experiment is under intense scrutiny, and it may be catching.
It's all to do with what's called community policing, getting the boys in blue out amongst the people. So in Redcliffe, with its many kilometres of bikeways, putting bobbies on bicycles just seemed the natural thing to do.
There's a big bicycle population and they get down on the bikeways, and there's a lot of people walking and jogging also down there, and we can't get there with the car.
With bicycles such a popular means of transport on the peninsula, Constables Brad Smart and Mark Anderson hardly rated a second glance when they took to the road today. According to District Inspector Neil Bem, that's just the way he wants it.
People know us, and the police get to know the people. It's a two-way thing.
From tomorrow, time's up for ugly street parking meters in Gympie. They were being removed today to make way for these. Parking coupons, a Swedish system, will be trialled in Gympie for 12 months. Motorists can buy half-hour or hourly coupons from any one of dozens of retail outlets across town. Once parked, the driver punches out with a pen or car key the month, day, date, hour and minute of arrival and secures it inside the car window. The big plus, prepaid parking allows drivers to move to other spaces without paying extra. There's another great advantage to this new coupon system. You no longer need to delve into pockets and purses to find exactly the right change for the meter. The system is a success in England, but Gympie people aren't so sure.
I think it's probably easier just putting your money in the meters.
It is simple enough for people to understand, but for convenience sake, from my point of view, I'd rather just put my hand in my pocket.
Carol Horn for 7 News.
I'll be back after the break with Brett Ogle's costly self-inflicted injury. Lawyers for charged former Rothwell's chief, Laurie Connell, have tried to stop investigators from reading hundreds of documents seized from Connell. In the Perth Supreme Court today, Connell's lawyer said surprise raids on his home and offices last Friday were unlawful. Alison Fan reports.
As Laurie Connell was being arrested on 44 charges at police headquarters on Friday, Rothwell's investigators were launching 5 separate and simultaneous raids. They seized cartons of documents and personal belongings from Connell's offices in West Perth, his homes in Peppermint Grove and Bustleton, a Subiaco storage area, and from his accountants in the city. Today, Connell's lawyer, Stephen Archer, told a hearing that police had taken everything and anything, regardless of what was stated on the search warrant. He produced affidavits from Connell's wife and employees that during the raids, excessive force was used. Documents were seized that were unrelated to Laurie Connell, legal professional privilege was violated, the search warrant contravened, and the search carried out unlawfully and improperly. There are also reports that the Connells' Wedgwood dinner set was also seized.
No.
Mr. Connell, is it true that they took your dinner set?
Not that I know about. Which one?
Today's Supreme Court order now prevents the Rothwell's investigators from inspecting the seized documents until the outcome of Connell's challenge later this week.
Australian PGA champion Brett Ogle has a fractured kneecap and won't play in this week's $1 million Johnny Walker Classic at Royal Melbourne. Ogle will never forget the par 4 17th on the final round of yesterday's Australian Open. Only 2 shots off the lead, his second shot ricocheted off a tree and smashed into his left knee. That cost him a 2-shot penalty for hitting himself. After a beer can compress was applied, Ogle continued. His next shot flew into the lake. He finished with 9 for the hole and no hope of winning the $100,000 first prize. Doctors today told him to rest for 3 weeks. And when we come back, a lady preparing to climb every mountain. Well, almost every mountain.